Book Arts Introduction. Imagine a world where only rich people could afford books. It's hard to imagine a world where books are rare, but books have been this way for most of history. What relationship do we have with books today? Has the digital age we live in made books obsolete? And what purposes do they actually serve today? In this lesson, we will look at how books have functioned to spread information, but also as a form of art and self expression. Books used to be so difficult to produce that only the elite could afford them, and they weren't always traditional books. What forms of books were there before paper was invented? It can be argued that the earliest writings were petroglyphs and hieroglyphs, but the earliest movable writings that have been found by archaeologists were on stone, wood, metal plates, and even bone. Here's an example of the Sumatra language written on bamboo, and it was sometimes written on bone. Let's also look at the most common historical book forms anciently. Clay tablets were popular throughout the ancient Near East during the Bronze Age. They used a reed stylus to write in the wet clay. This is an example from around 600 BC in a story called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Papyrus was the first paper like product used by the ancient Egyptians, though it wasn't paper. It is a thick sheet made from the pith of the papyrus plant and then rolled up into a scroll. This is an example from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Many cultures used scrolls in creative ways. The Israelites also used scrolls of parchments made from animal skins and dowels to create handles. The Japanese would hang scrolls of paintings and calligraphy on cloth. You will also have a chance to do some stylized writing on a book form of your choosing in art class. What would you create on a scroll? Bamboo and wooden slips were invented before the Chinese ever invented paper. They sometimes used silk sheets, but they were more often used as sticks or bamboo bound together to write on. They've been found as far back as 1250 BC. So, this is an example in the picture of a Chinese slip called The Art of War. The Romans used beeswax tablets in schools, and early Christians introduced the codex, much like a book today, usually made from papyrus or parchment. It was a stack of folded scrolls or cut sheets bound together at one edge. Handmade paper was invented more than 2,000 years ago in China, made from the fibers of mulberry trees. They kept it a secret until 751 AD when Arabs captured two Chinese papermakers during war, who taught them how to make it. The Islamic world even began using hemp and cloth rags as ingredients. Paper wasn't even introduced to Europe until 500 years later. After paper came onto the scene in Europe, it was also used in the tradition of making smaller documents, also on thin vellum, leather, called illuminated manuscripts, like in this photo. These were heavily decorated pages with stylized illustrations, and eventually these kinds of documents um, could be boxed and even bound or folded in different ways to make storage easier. Unfortunately, this kind of beautiful artistic handmade work died out after the invention of the printing press. And so this example is an Armenian illuminated manuscript in the Byzantine style from the 17th century. Bookbinding. It has taken literally thousands of years for bookbinding systems ever to be developed across the world. Mostly, we find ancient book forms before books were invented. Most books today use a sewn case binding or glue bindings, but there were hundreds of ways to do it, and you can think of different ways to make books. We will be making a Japanese style book binding to make a sketchbook for our art class to be used throughout the semester, much like the ones in the pictures. Of course, you'll want to give your cover a creative title and some imagery to connect ideas or a theme that interests you. What are books for exactly, especially as things have changed today? Even after books had been established and a way of containing information and knowledge, there was another monumental change, and that was the tradition of scribes, and who were given the task of copying books as titled. They were called copyists, calligraphers, illuminators, and even correctors. There were different jobs, and they were all challenged by the invention of a later invention. That invention was printmaking. Printmaking has taken on many forms over the years, especially people who've looked for easy, effective ways to reproduce their knowledge for thousands of years. And books have been the place to do that. But later in the semester, in our drawing unit, you'll get a chance to make relief prints. One form of relief printing is called woodblock carvings. This picture or woodblock carving was invented in China around 220 AD. They were first used to print patterns on cloth, but the earliest book printed from carved wood was movable type, and it was this. This picture was the Diamond Sutra in 868 AD. It contains Buddhist wisdom and was known as our oldest existing printed and dated book. Not only is the text beautiful, but notice how involved and ornate the imagery is too. The revolution of movable and printable type didn't reach Europe until the 1400s when a goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press and metal type. This changed the world. It changed the world entirely, much like computers have today. Even though the press did much of the work, um, for a long time, books were still made by hand. Books are also beautiful objects in their own right. We know that books they're meant to record knowledge, wisdom, beliefs, stories, instructions, and ideas. Your challenge in my class is to make it into an art form with a message.